Welcome to the podcast. Chris Graham, joined by Scott German, and we're actually just a few hours away from the start of the football season, week 0. Most of the schools, including everybody in the ACC, doesn't start until next week. But we're going to talk college football in the context of college sports and conference realignment, or lack thereof. There's a lot still being said, Scott. You and I have been texting about this the last few days. About the ACC and whether or not it's done in terms of realignment. And there's been a lot of talk about still Stanford, Cal, SMU, some combination of those schools perhaps being on the verge of getting invites to the ACC. What's the latest you're hearing, thinking, sensing, anything of that nature regarding all this going on?
I'm probably, along with everyone else, just hearing little bits and pieces. But from what I'm gathering, it's just a matter of time that some of the no votes were swayed over to yes votes, and it's just a matter of time before those 3 schools are added. But whether that happens or not, time will tell. But that's what I'm hearing, that it's close to being a done deal.
Setting the context for those who either have been following this and maybe didn't see some of the details, etc. There are 15 member ACC schools if you include Notre Dame. Even though Notre Dame's not a football member, they are the school is an ACC member and gets to vote on these kind of things. And the ACC's bylaws require that if there's to be any schools added to the conference, that it will take a vote of at least 75% of the league's members. And so out of 15, that would require 12, even though that's 80%. 11 is only 73.3%. So you need to get 12 votes. As of what we've been told, no formal votes have been taken, but we've been told that Clemson, Florida State, North Carolina State have been 4 schools who've been voting against the expansion. We don't know if those 4 may have been joined by anyone else, just that those 4 are the 4 that we know. So it would take at least one of those schools being persuaded to join in and create that 75% supermajority. And actually, Scott, what I'm seeing is that they're at the talk, at least amongst those who think they're in the know, is that North Carolina State both are ready to switch their votes from no to yes. So that would be 13 out of 15 and would be more than what was needed. So if that's the case, then we'd have to then ask and then be told what the timing of this would be. Would those schools be invited for entry next year? And I think that seems like it would be the most logical thing to do. And then also, the $64,000 or maybe $64 million question is a better way to put it. How much money do the current schools get in addition to what they're already being paid for their TV contract, and how's the money work out? Because this is all about money. This isn't about, hey, let's add these schools because it makes a lot of geographic sense. This is about money.
Everything's about money, right?
Yeah. The world goes around with money.
So are you to just flip the scripts here a little bit? Let me ask a question or two. What side of the fence are you on the ACC allowing Notre Dame to have a say in the expansion?
I don't think there's any question they have a say. They're a conference member. There's not that the ACC allows them to; it's that they are a conference member, so they get to have the vote. Morally, whether or not they should have a vote is another question. But they are a conference member. And so as a result, I don't think it's the ACC being nice and saying, hey, Notre Dame, you guys vote. Maybe another question would be, should Notre Dame be public with its vote and be lobbying other members because they're not a full member because they're not a football member. And if they were a football member, maybe there wouldn't be as much of a need to add other members to the conference. But no, they're an ACC member, so they get a vote.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. They are a member of the ACC. Chris, you and I talked about this. I am still of the thinking that eventually the TV networks, Fox, ESPN, whoever else is involved, are going to tighten the screws on these schools and want them to expand their conference schedules. I think you and I agree on that.
Well, let me throw out the SEC. The ESPN tried to push the SEC into doing that, and the SEC said, "Give us more money, and we'll do it." And so and then when ESPN came back and said, "No, we're not going to give you more money," then the SEC said, "No, we're not going to do it." So, I mean, yeah, maybe eventually. I don't know about turning the screws because the contracts are for what they are now. If they want to give them more money, they will. I think that eventually you'll probably see the networks say, "Okay, we would rather have better games, so we'll give you some more money." But so
Right.
in the end, that answers your question. Yes, yes.
And when that time comes, I really think it's going to paint Notre Dame into a corner that Notre Dame's going to have a hard time filling their own inventory with games. And that this is maybe why Notre Dame is in favor of conference expansion, because eventually they're going to have to join the conference.
I still don't know if I agree with that perception, just because they extracted out of the deal with the ACC, and this is John Swafford, part of John Swafford's legacy. They get 5 games a year with the ACC. That, of course, they're not conference games, but those are 5 non-conference games that they don't have to go out and schedule. If the ACC were to try to take that part away, I mean, yeah, then it becomes difficult. But at this point, because they get 5 ACC games, 5 non-conference games with the ACC, they've only got to schedule 7 other games. I would think that what Notre Dame would do if I were Notre Dame, and Notre Dame, the folks who run Notre Dame are a lot smarter than me. But if I were them, if things got to be an issue in terms of scheduling games, I would say, all right, we're willing to play 6 ACC non-conference games or 7 ACC non-conference or even 8 ACC non-conference games. Just not count them as conference games. And we're not going to share our TV money with you in any other way. Before I would try to join the conference. So I'll just throw that out there that I don't know that Notre Dame's still Notre Dame. They're still the Yankees. They're still the Cowboys, and they play by a different set of rules, like it or not. I think that's just reality.
Yeah. And I guess by adding Cal and Stanford and SMU, then that's 3 more games that potentially would be on Notre Dame's schedule.
They could. I mean, yeah. If Notre Dame got in that situation, yeah, and they play Stanford just about every year. I think there's been 2 years in the last 30, 35, and one of those was a COVID year where they didn't play each other in a non-conference game. So they don't want Stanford to be in the Mountain West and play that game. They'd rather Stanford be a Power 4, I guess it would be now, not Power 5, but they'd rather them be in a power conference. It just helps their strength of schedule for that to be the case. And so, that's a factor there too. And, the other side of this is from the standpoint of, okay, so there's 2 sets of constituencies here within even the ACC leadership. There are the ADs, the athletics directors, who, yeah, they're looking at it and saying, all right, Stanford and Cal and SMU. SMU is Texas, so that's a little far out of our comfort zone. But then the other 2 are out in California. That's way out of our scheduling zone. But there's money, so money's good. The university presidents look at those 3 schools and say, man, we can, from an academics perspective, we can have collaborations now with Stanford, Cal, and SMU. SMU is a school that ranks right there in the heart of where the ACC schools rank in the U.S. News rankings. Stanford and Cal are Stanford and Cal. I mean, those are top schools in the country. And so the presidents, I'm sure, are very much in favor of this from the academic standpoint. And then, they'll eventually tell the ADs, figure out the scheduling.
Yeah. So I'm thinking, why the flip from a couple of schools to vote now for expansion? And I'm thinking that it's just kind of a way to buy some time until someone figures out how to end the grant of rights, or it actually does end. That this helps make up some ground, because these schools are going to get by adding those three schools and two of those three basically saying we'll come in for nothing. And the other, I think it was Stanford agreeing to a very low percentage for a while. Then it's going to help narrow the gap a little bit between the ACC and the other two power two conferences.
Yeah.
I just think it's a sort of a move to just buy some time.
Well, I don't even know about buying time from this standpoint. Now that August 15th has passed, the deadline for schools, if they wanted to leave for next year, has passed. There was a lot of bluster from Florida State publicly, and then we heard behind the scenes from folks at UVA, so privately, that they thought they could challenge the grant of rights. Well, Florida State, for all the public bluster, didn't leave the conference and didn't announce they're going to leave next year. Then they could announce anytime in the near future that they're going to leave in 2025 or 2026, but to do so with no standing offer, which it doesn't seem like one is sitting out there for them, doesn't seem like a smart move on Florida State's part. It could be a gamble that they could win at, and it could be a gamble where they're an independent. And they were an independent in football for a while, and then back in the Bobby Bowden era, and it worked out for a while, but that was a different era in college sports. Plus, they would be left to fight the grant of rights by themselves. We were told, Scott, a few weeks ago that that by well-placed people that there were standing offers for UVA and UNC to join the Big Ten, but the fallback for the Big Ten would be Stanford and Cal. Well, if the ACC votes to bring in Stanford and Cal, the fallback goes away. And if the ACC adds Stanford, Cal, and SMU, I think that any incentive for UVA and UNC to go to the Big Ten goes away because they'll be making more money. They won't be making Big Ten money or SEC money, but they'll be bringing in more money from the TV markets out in San Francisco and Dallas. So I don't know. I think that I think it's more than a stalling tactic or a buying time tactic. I think that this move could be the move that whether or not people are jumping up and down, throwing parades in ACC, the ADs and president's offices across the Southeast and the Northeast and everything else. I think it's something that they'll say, we'll take it. It's better than what we had before, and it's better than having to spend a lot of money in court and maybe losing and the uncertainty thereof.
So yesterday, we talked, and let's talk about it a little more. The travel, the increased travel expenses is really much to do about nothing, if you think about it. And I really thought about it even more after we hung up, because the football program are only going out to those schools once every so many years because you don't play around robin. The basketball programs can go out there and make a double header of it. And some sports you're not going to play out there every year. The travel expenses are going to come in for Cal and Stanford.
Right.
They're the ones that are going to be really absorbing a humongous increase in their travel budgets, not the ACC schools.
Yeah, the budgets in terms of their travel and transportation and hotel and lodging, but also the costs on their student athletes who will have to, maybe spend a week on the East Coast or whatever when they're traveling. Not the football teams necessarily. Obviously, they'll probably fly out on Thursdays to acclimate to the time change. They'll ask the ACC and demand, I'd say, from the ACC, no 12 o'clock kickoffs for these games, please. That's 9 o'clock body time. At least give us 3:30 or a prime time game when we come across. And same thing when flipping back. No 7:30 Pacific kickoffs. We don't want 10:30 body time for the East Coast teams. But the baseball and softball when they have to play 3-game series, you're right. It's mostly for the Cals and the Stanfords. SMU and Dallas is only one time zone away, so that's nothing for either side on that equation. But and there will be some increased travel cost involving even in those games because you're not going to bus your baseball team or your softball team out to Dallas. You're going to fly there, obviously. So that does add one more flight for some of your non-revenue sports when they have to play those games, but they're not every year. as far as that goes. So yeah, the biggest costs are being borne there by Stanford and Cal and their student athletes. And I would wonder how that would impact their recruiting and their competitiveness. But on the other side, they're looking at it and saying, what is us dropping down to the Mountain West as an example of what could happen to them? What is dropping down to the Mountain West do for us in terms of recruiting? So it's they're the ones taking the risk here, and they're also the ones saying, we'll take either no money or just a little bit of money for a few years just for the privilege of being able to play in the ACC. So, they're getting the double whammy. They're going to get less money, and they're going to have to pay more out in the travel. So that's their problem. Not as much as certainly it is our problem here on the East Coast.
Yeah, you can, I haven't looked, but I wonder if Cal and Stanford's rosters for football, I wonder how California based they are, or do you think they recruit nationally?
I haven't looked, so but I would think if I'm them, I'm recruiting the heck out of California. There's so many players there. It's such a huge state,
Yeah.
not just in terms of population, but size. I mean, it goes all the way up. I think Virginia is similar latitude as like San Francisco, and there's still a lot. I mean, there's not a lot of population north of San Francisco, but there's still a lot of state north of San Francisco. So it's a huge state geographically, huge state in terms of numbers of students and then athletes, and then lots of football players. So if they might get some national recruits, but they're, I would assume that a good portion of their roster is California now. So the question isn't, again, does it hurt their recruiting or help their recruiting? It probably helps our recruiting, because if you're, if you're Virginia recruiting a kid from California, hey, we'll play Stanford a couple of times in your 4 years here. We'll play Cal a couple of times in your 4 years here. So, we might be out in your neck of the woods for your hometown people to see us. And plus, those kids might see Stanford, they'll see Stanford and Cal playing ACC teams. As a result, they'll see more ACC football, and that might get them thinking ACC more. And if Stanford and Cal is not good enough for them in their minds, they might decide to go somewhere else in the ACC. So I think that and SMU giving us an actual foothold in Texas. Obviously Texas is also a big state for recruiting in football. Big state geographically, big state in terms of population, and boy, we get kids in Texas who are going to be watching us more. So these are going to again be helpful things for ACC school, the current ACC schools, and maybe not as good in that respect for those newcomers if they come in.
Chris, you and I, and before I get to that, I just pulled up Cal's roster. I would say just off the top of my head at first look, about 75% of their roster are California players.
Okay.
About 95% appear to be West Coast players. Mm-hmm. They do have a couple of players, one player from Florida, one player from Texas, one player from Tennessee, couple from Colorado, but primarily West Coast. So,
and Cal and Stanford, they've been down in the last few years, but they've had success. Stanford had great success. Jim Harbaugh, and then what Jim Harbaugh left behind for David Shaw the first few years of the David Shaw regime. I mean, when they had Andrew Luck at quarterback, they were consistently in the top 5 of the country for several years there. And Cal, maybe not quite to that height, but I'm remembering Marshawn Lynch and his years there. They've had some really good teams. So there's potential there for those two schools, and that's probably what they see. They want to, continue to compete at that level. SMU, of course, their history is way back in the 80s, but they were a national program back in the 80s before the cheating scandal, death penalty, and that kind of thing. But they've got oil money, and they've been jonesing to be in a Power 5 conference for years, and so. You get them and their oil money in the ACC, and you're going to see a power there too. So I think from the football standpoint, adding these 3 schools will help greatly the rest of the ACC as we're getting ready to expand to a 12-team playoff. I think we're adding some schools that could, maybe eventually compete at that level. They could be schools that could compete for playoff bids in a few years.
Yeah, and old school people like you and I, or me certainly, we just have to forget about geographic sense. Does it make sense? Because it hasn't made geographic sense for the ACC since they added Louisville and Notre Dame.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, they don't touch anything Atlantic.
so it's no longer about that. One other tidbit about Cal, they do have a Virginia connection. Vic Soto
Okay, yeah,
is the
yeah.
special teams coordinator, and he was a graduate assistant at UVA in 2019.
Yeah, yeah. One of the Samoan guys that came along or was lured there by the Bronco group with all their great ties, recruiting the American Samoa football players dating back to their BYU days. Yeah, great to hear that.
And you know, I think you and I should get some credit because we talked about SMU before anyone mentioned it. You
Yeah,
remember?
we
Well,
were at the ACC kickoff last year, back in 2022, when a lot of schools were being mentioned as possibles, and I don't know what it was. We both threw out SMU. I think you've traveled a lot over the years in your working days to Dallas, and we're thinking out loud. All right, who fits the bill here? Well, SMU's got a lot of money, and
a lot
they're
of
a good
money,
school.
and you did your research on. They certainly qualify educationally.
Yeah,
It's a
yeah,
good, solid school.
they're I think they're ranked this year's rankings of the U.S. News and World Report. They of national universities, they were 72nd, which I think tied them with NC State. And there were they were right there. There were a bunch of schools in the ACC cloistered between 60 and 80, and they were right there in the middle of it all. They got a couple $1 billion endowment when I looked that up. They got money. And they play. I mean, they play sports well. Football. I think they won 8 games last year. I want to say that, and I'm sure someone will correct me if I'm wrong on that. I'm just talking off the top of my head there. But they've had some good basketball in recent years. And so they wouldn't bring us down athletically. They certainly wouldn't bring us down academically. And they want to be there. They actually want to be in the ACC, and you can't say that even right now for everybody in the ACC.
Yeah, I was reading a story about SMU and their endowment, and the story I read was that a lot of schools have a lot of money in endowment, but it's old money that may or may not last generations. SMU, most of their endowment money is oil money that isn't going away. So SMU is a school that has money, is willing to spend it. And you can just imagine what being in a Power Five conference will do for them.
Well, and I mean, in both cases, because Stanford and Cal are in the San Francisco TV market, and then SMU's in the Dallas Fort Worth TV market. Those are both top 10 TV markets in the country. That's important from the ACC network's bottom line. All of a sudden, ESPN can raise the carriage fees to those two TV markets. The Dallas TV market slightly over 3 million households. The San Francisco TV market is around 2.7 million TV households. And so all of a sudden you go from charging, a few cents per month per subscriber to a few dollars per month per subscriber. That obviously is going to increase revenues for the ACC network, which then goes back out to the member schools. This is, we're talking about, sometimes in business you're landlocked because you can't, you're surrounded by buildings. You can't get any bigger physically because of that. Well, the ACC sort of landlocked in terms of money. They're money locked. We're locked into a TV contract through 2036 with ESPN that isn't going to grow. And so, it's not going to grow on its own. Let's just say the way it grows is if, you figure out a way to grow the base. And so adding, you wouldn't want to just add anybody. You wouldn't want to just add, say, West Virginia and Morgantown, West Virginia. They're in the Pittsburgh TV market. We've already got the Pittsburgh TV market. We've got Pittsburgh. We got Pitt. And so that wouldn't necessarily add any new TV subscriber money to the ACC's coffers. But certainly, if you go to Dallas and you go to San Francisco, you're adding new TV viewers that will be charged extra for ACC network access, and that's the way this is the only way really the ACC can grow its revenue base is through adding TV viewers to the ACC TV network.
Yeah, and those three schools would definitely do it.
They would, and and then I mean, the wild card then is Notre Dame, and Scott, I think your points are valid. I mean, Notre Dame eventually may, if they're going to join a conference, they have the same issue that Florida State or anybody else would have with the grant of rights. If they decide, hey, we'd like to be in the Big Ten, great. We have your media rights through 2036. You'd have to do the same thing Florida State would have to do, or Clemson or Virginia, North Carolina, anybody in the ACC would have to do. You basically have to go to court to see that happen, and it could take the court cases can take years. The court cases of this detailed technical nature can take years to sort through, and so if they're inclined to join the conference, it's likely going to be the ACC, and so. Perhaps shoring up the ACC's bottom line by adding, big market, good academic programs, good athletics programs like SMU, Cal, and Stanford could convince Notre Dame to say, oh, you know what? Let's go ahead and do it. Let's go ahead and pull the trigger. And let's join in. So if that's going to happen, I'm not sure it does, but if that's going to happen, I think this kind of move could help push Notre Dame across the line there.
It won't hurt it. I don't think it'll deter it. I'm not saying that this is the move that makes Notre Dame go into the ACC, whether because they're scheduling conflicts or lack of scheduling opportunities. But I think this is a move that would appeal to their fan base too, because these are teams that they are familiar with playing. Certainly Cal and Stanford, not as much SMU, but certainly Cal and Stanford.
Well, and those three programs are named programs to some degree, and so that helps too. And and Notre Dame has been advocating for this. Your first question, Scott, was, is it fair for Notre Dame to have a vote? Well, and my answer was, yeah, they have a vote, but morally, should they be advocating for something? They have been advocating for these moves to add Cal, Stanford, and SMU. So Notre Dame's brain trust thinks that the ACC should do this, and they must think it's good for their bottom line too in that respect. So whether or not it has impact on future decisions Notre Dame may make is a question left probably for the future, right? But I think that at this standpoint, they're behind it. Most of the rest of the ACC is behind it. And I mean, what we're hearing, we're recording this just so folks know, it's 2:12 Eastern time on Friday. I give that time and the date just because the word has been that perhaps by the weekend, and which means we're getting close to the weekend, it's Friday, we could have some news on this front. And so I know, Scott, I've been doing this for the last like 6 weeks, but I've been increasing the frequency of checking my email, checking my text, checking the internet, because I mean, I really, based on what we're hearing, I think that there's news that'll be coming on this maybe in the next 24 hours.
Yeah, I think you're right. One last tidbit about that. There was a great article in I believe it was Wednesday's San Francisco Chronicle, which would be the home paper for Stanford.
And Cal, I would assume too.
And Cal, and certainly Cal. About how Stanford was the ultimate, and it was a very well-written article. I would highly recommend reading it. How Stanford was the ultimate victim in the hypocrisy of the college term student athlete, and how that they were literally sacrificing that student athlete in order to chase the almighty dollar.
I mean, that's fine. College athletics, since the first teams were playing football in the early 1900s or late 1890s or whatever it was, and started, they were recruiting players and paying guys, and the NCAA formed trying to combat the lawlessness. College football, college sports has always been about money. It's always been a seedy business. I mean, just so to say that Stanford is now all of a sudden breaking the rules. I mean,
well, they are. I won't go over it, but it was basically, okay, they're going to make money regardless, even if they stay in the new form Pac-12, Big Mountain West, or whatever. But they're chasing the ultimate dollar by joining a conference in which they're going to force their student athletes to make 2,500-mile 5,000-mile round trips.
Well, see, I would argue, I mean, without having, studied that topic, Stanford is one of those schools like Virginia and North Carolina that fields teams in pretty much every NCAA sanctioned sport. And does the Mountain West do that? I don't think the Mountain West does. And so if you're Stanford and you want to preserve your totality of your athletics program, they're looking at it and saying the ACC, does at least offer all these sports and we can maintain those programs. And if we go to a Mountain West, we have to cobble together affiliations. If we may have to join this conference as an affiliate member for this sport and another conference as an affiliate member for that sport. And maybe as a result, instead of doing all that, we just drop sports. So, and they don't want to do that. Stanford is a school, an athletics program, is one that regularly either wins the Directors Cup or is in the top 3 or 4. They're kind of like a Virginia and Carolina again. Those programs do well across a breadth of athletics offerings. And I don't know that, for that school being a part of the Mountain West allows them to maybe have that kind of impact. So, it's easy for an editorial writer, newspaper writer, sports writer to, and it's one of those moralistic things that some sports writers like to do. They like to get on their high horse and act like that they're better than all this. But, I don't think that the people who run Stanford are any dumber than the people who run other athletics programs and other schools. They're looking out and saying, we want to maintain what we have. The best way for us to maintain what we have is to make this move. If they want to consult a guy making $40,000 a year to write columns for a newspaper, that's probably not the best way to go about doing that kind of thing.
Yeah, and it is about money. So, I mean, that's why I expect Stanford, Cal, SMU. I fully expect to see all of them in the ACC, and because money makes the world go around, right?
Did I smack down that editorial writer, the sports writer, well enough there?
Yeah, you sort of did.
I might be overstating how much he makes. That's the only thing about that.
Yeah, I think you might be. He may make 42,000 a year.
Oh, out in California, and living in a big market. Inflation,
but it might be monopoly money for all we know.
Because his inflationary money out there might not spend as much as 40,000 would on the East Coast, but in our market anyway. But anyway, no, this has been a great discussion, and so we think we might may have told you some news there, and also kind of analyzed it for you. But we'll be watching, and Scott, between Scott and I, we will. Probably if there is breaking news this weekend, we'll certainly have it to you, not just the news, but then the analysis as well. So, well, Scott, thanks for your time and your input here. For our listeners, thank you for joining in, listeners and viewers, though, on YouTube. And we will be talking to you again soon.